So today we're going to be talking about ChemSketch, and I'm also going to be talking about Name a little bit later on. So if you went onto our website or signed up for the power lesson, you may have seen the agenda, but I'm just going to go over it again. So the first part is the ChemSketch overview. Here I'm going to talk about the button and toolbar layout, document versus page navigation, and also how to configure the drawing area. So this is mostly for people who are new to the software, who've never seen it before, and maybe just want a quick overview of how to get around and how to click all the buttons and extra. The next part we're going to talk about is structure modes. This is going to be the main meat and potatoes of this presentation. Everything that we do as chemists is going to be pretty much in structure mode. So there's a couple of things here. First, we want to talk about manually drawing structures, and then we're going to talk about using the ACD dictionary for those of you who have the full version of ChemSketch, and also how we can automatically add user templates so we don't have to draw the same thing over and over and over again. Another thing I want to talk a bit about is atom modification, so how you can change isotopes and charges and that sort of thing. And also styling, so changing the colors, changing the bond thickness, etc. The next section will be draw modes. This is pretty brief. It's just going to be basic shapes and how you can put them on the page, how you can group them, how you can align it on the page, that sort of thing. This is kind of like, think of it as a paint application where you can just draw stuff. And then the last part, as I said, is the ACD name. So this is actually something you can enable within ChemSketch. So it's not going to look very different in terms of interface, but you will have a few more buttons that I'll be reviewing. And there is a couple of versions of Name. So depending on what software package you have purchased or not purchased, you may have a different version. So I'll just cover that briefly in a minute. We'll also talk about how you can do get a structure out of a name and vice versa. So just a couple of points about the ChemSketch versions. This is the list of things that are in the full version only. So if you're using the freeware, you may not have available, well, you won't have access to the dictionary. So if you're wondering, oh, well, that button is there, why can't I see it? That's why. So just keep that in mind. The other two are not really relevant for today's presentation. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention was that the freeware use cases are for academic and personal use. If you're using it as part of a government or commercial institution and you're using it for your job, then you must purchase the full version. So you can have a 30-day free trial, that's fine. But after that, you must let us know if you want to buy it or not. And another thing too, in 2019, we have made our software 64-bit. So what this means is it's not going to run on your 32-bit computer. And you also must have Windows. For Mac users, if you want to use the software, we recommend having some layer of emulation. So that means you have to have some sort of Windows operating system, whether it's in a virtual machine or through Boot Camp. I know there's a couple of ways to do it, but if you need help, just let us know. We can get you help with that. So if you want to know what system type you have, maybe you're curious, you have to go to your About My Computer from the Windows Start menu, and then under the options where it says device specifications, there'll be system type, and it should say 64-bit. So that's how you can figure that out. So that's it for the ChemSketch versions. The name versions that we have, so this is a table from our website. You can see the link down below here. So the first one is the ChemSketch naming version that comes with the full version and the freeware version of ChemSketch. So you'll see that we have a limitation on how many atoms there are, and it's only 50 atoms, and that includes hydrogens. And also the types of atoms that you can name are listed here. There's also a limit on how many rings you can have. And the other thing that we don't have in this basic version is the name to structure option. The next one would be the chemist version. So this is essentially the full version of Name minus the specialized view and minus the options. And then the last one would be you have the full package, you have a separate interface with buttons, and you also have much more languages than the other two packages. So with that, I think I'm going to go into my live demo of the software now. So I'm just going to open ChemSketch, and you can see that I have it open here in the left-hand side. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was just the general toolbars and buttons. Now, the first thing that you may encounter when you open the software is the file associations window that's going to ask you whether you want to associate this program with certain file types. This isn't super important, but essentially what you want to do is say you had ChemDraw, for example. You don't want to associate ChemSketch with ChemDraw because you want to still open ChemDraw objects within ChemDraw. So you can just go ahead and leave that unchecked. And then this box that says always perform check when starting the program, you want to leave that unchecked so it's not going to bother you every single time. But if you wouldn't want to access it, it will be available from the file menu. The other thing we have at the top here, so we have the name of the file and also the name of the file at the bottom. And if I made a modification in the window, like let's say I added a benzene ring, you can see it says modified, and it also tells us how many fragments we have, the formula weight, and the molecular formula for the fragment that I drew. Most of the options that can be accessed are in the menu options, so you can look through to see what options we have. This general toolbar here is essentially all the buttons that let you work with the document and the viewing the page, zooming in and out, that sort of thing. So if we look at the difference between structure and draw mode, so that, remember, that was the two main sections that I'm going to talk about. So structure mode is essentially for drawing chemicals and reactions. Anything else, so if I click this button here, you can see the changes. We have essentially shapes, we have text. So if you wanted to write a little novel maybe in ChemSketch, I don't know why, but you could if you wanted to. But most of it is going to be done in structure mode. So the documents that we have, so you can see we have a separate menu item for documents. And right now I only have one document and it's called noname01.sk2. So sk2 is the extension for ChemSketch documents. So keep that in mind when you're looking on your computer, where did I save that? You can also search by sk2 documents. The maximum number of documents you can have at a time is 10, just open. So obviously you can have more than that on your computer at once, but you can only have 10 open at once. So if I do file new 10 times, it's going to gray it out after that because I shouldn't have more than 10 documents open. So just be aware of that. So to add pages within your document, you click this new page button here, or you can go to pages new, and that's going to insert a new page at the end. So you can see now I have page 2 of 2, and you can just navigate between them as you wish to left and right. And then if you forgot, or maybe you didn't like this page anymore, you can just click the delete page button and it will get rid of the page for you. Now, one thing I like to do in ChemSketch is actually just hide some of the buttons because it can be a little bit overwhelming when you first start. There's just so many buttons to click and you don't really know what any of them do. So one of the things I'm going to disable right now is our add-ons. So if you go to the options menu and go to the add-on organizer, so this is the buttons here at the top is where we're going to disable them from. And if I just unselect all and click OK, you'll notice that that giant chunk of buttons just disappeared. The other thing I like to do is change the style. So right now the background is kind of this blue color. So if you go to the ACDLabs menu and set up style, I just like to put it as silver. That's my favorite version. You can also go for the retro classic version and pretend you're in a Windows 95 environment or something like that if you wanted to as well. So I'm going to put it back to the normal color, just so you guys see what I see. And then all these buttons, all these toolbars are configurable. So if you see here on the right-hand side of the toolbar, there's a little show buttons button. And if you click that, you will see all the buttons that you have available and you can hide some of them. So let's say that I don't use Inchy, so I can just unselect that and it will get rid of the button from the toolbar for me. The other thing you may want to do is configure the size of the page itself. So let's say you're printing on a different kind of paper. So you want to go to File, Page Setup, and then you'll have the option to change the format. So right now mine's in letter format and it's portrait. So let's say I wanted mine to be in landscape, so I can choose that. And one nice thing is you can apply this to the whole document, or you can just apply it to one page. Let's say you had a large table and you only wanted that page to be a landscape view and the rest to be portrait. You can do that if you want. Another thing you might want to do is change the margins. So the margins will give you this little dashed line here around the area, so you know where you can print and where you can't print. Another thing I like to do is actually turn off the margins. So you'll see in my options, I have a preferences, and I can go in here and there's a lot of things you can change, but one of the things I like to do is just turn that off. Because I don't often print anything, it's a lot cleaner for me to see it in a blank screen like this. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the structured drawing style, sort of like a segue into our structure mode. So let's say that I'm drawing and I have to submit this diagram to a certain journal. We have the option to use a different drawing style depending on that. So that's in the options menu under set structured drawing style. And let's say I wanted the American Chemical Society. I can click this one. And it will ask me if I want to set it for all the drawn structures. And so I can click yes. And you'll see it made it slightly smaller to conform with the American Chemical Society specifications for the bond lengths. So that's just one thing I like to do. Another thing is if you're liking the units to be different. So let's say you had the ruler on. So I'll just enable that so you guys can see what it looks like. So it's just this ruler here. And right now it's in inches. Let's say you wanted to put it in a different format. You can go to your preferences and change the measurement units from inches to millimeters or centimeters or points as you would. So we can just change it like that. And so just a quick overview of the zooming features we have. So there's a couple of buttons here at the top. One of them is to show the whole page. So if I click this button here, the whole page will be visible in my screen. If I use this button, the whole width of the page will be visible in my screen. And then if I use this button, it's going to fit anything that I have drawn into the screen. So now the benzene ring is nice and centered, and if I want to add stuff, I can. Or you can use the drop-down menu to change it. There's also a square zoom button. So another thing about our buttons is that some of them have this very faint triangle at the bottom right-hand corner. That means that there are several more options inside. So if you click that, you see that we get another drop-down menu and you can choose between what button you want to show. So in this case, I'll just use a regular zoom button and we can click that and zoom in. So I mentioned before that I disabled all the add-ons. If you want to bring them back, all you have to do is go to the options menu, add-on organizer, and then you can right click in here, select all and click OK, and it will display the buttons back for you. So finally, we get to drawing structures. Hopefully you guys are a little more okay with all the buttons and everything that I'm showing. So let's say that I wanted to add a carbon to our benzene here. So first thing we want to do is click this guy here. So this is our draw normal mode. And one of the things that sometimes confuses people is they think that in draw normal mode, if they click, they can just add a carbon, and that's not what's going to happen. So I'll show you what actually happens if I click it. So for this one, it changes because we're on a carbon. If you click it again, we'll see that it's going to grow. But if you choose a different atom color, the behavior is different. So actually it's going to replace the carbon atom that's there. So just keep that in mind. If you want to add things all the time, regardless of what you have chosen, then I would recommend using the draw continuous mode. So we can see the difference for that. So let's add another benzene ring here. And if I choose the carbon button, you'll notice that it will add it the same. Oh, sorry, we're in a different one. Except we'll have this kind of like funny bright colored option here. And all that's doing is you have to click to add it. So of course, in this case, I have to actually use my mouse to make it drawn, and it looks kind of ugly. So if I want to clean up my structure, we have this button here, clean structure, and you can click that and you see it puts it nicely for you. So another way you can do this is with the oxygen, as I said. So if you click and then you click again, it will add it. And I can keep adding oxygens forever and ever and ever until I get really bored. And it will clean the structure, see what that looks like. That's kind of fun. Another thing that people get confused about often is that there is a button here that looks kind of like a select button. Actually, what this does is it turns the lasso on and off. So if you want to go back to select mode, you can press your escape key and it will go back to this blue blob here, and that's just the select move mode. So if I wanted to move everything, I could do it like that. So the next thing we'll cover is drawing structures automatically. Now I mentioned the dictionary. So the dictionary is a button at the top right here, and you can look for structures that you've already drawn. So that's what it's asking me if I want to search for drawn structures, and I'm going to say no in this case. And then you can search for something, let's say acetaminophen, and it's going to bring it up here as we type. And so we can just click that and click OK. And what it does is it puts the structure on our mouse, and we can just click and it will paste it down in the same ACS drawing style that I've chosen. So if you don't have access to the dictionary because you're a freeware user, we can also talk about a few ways that you can add your structures without having to draw them every time. So I'm just going to add a new page here. So we're starting fresh. So one of the places we can do this is with the user templates button here. Now, if you click it right now, it's going to be probably empty. But let's say that I drew a structure. So just going to add some atoms on here, and then I'm going to clean it up a bit. And then let's say that I drew this a lot and I wanted to incorporate it into my user templates. So what I'd have to do is first select. So I'll show you now actually what lasso looks like. So if you turn on the lasso, you'll see that there's kind of like a circle select instead of a square select. And to select a molecule, you have to draw around it instead of just like a square. So personally, I prefer square select, but you guys may like this one more. So once you have it selected, you can go ahead and click the User Templates button, and you'll see that it's brought up this label that says temp 0. So you can have this to be anything you want. Let's say that I wanted to name this molecule after me, and so I put Jen there, and you'll see that there's a little thing that says Jen. You can also change this to be the structure if you would like. So you can see the structure there, or you can change it to be an image. So let's say I wanted a random picture from my computer. I can just go in here. And let's say I wanted this computer image or something. So if I click OK, now you see it's added it to my mouse, and I can click to add it to the screen. And then there's a little button here that says Gen for the tooltip, and there's a little computer. So if you guys wanted to, you could have all these structures here for your various chemicals. The other way you can do this is with the templates window. So there is a template organizer and template window and save user template. So these are the three options that you care about. So for example, let's say that I am going to be using the structure a lot, but I'm also going to be using some other random thing. So let's say always using this, always using. So we can add it there, and then we're going to just clean that up a bit. So we're always going to be using these two structures. So we want to add it to a template. So what we'd do is we'd say save user template, and I'm just going to put this on my desktop, and we're going to call this my template. Very creative, I know. It's going to ask you what you want to call the template. So this is the template name that will be displayed in the interface. So I can just call it my template there as well. And now what's going to happen is if I close this document and I go back to the templates window and I go to the bottom here, you'll see on the left-hand side there is an option called My Template, and that's page 1. There's the page where I overlapped them. And if we go to the pages at the top here, we can go to page 2 and we can see that those structures that I drew are there as well. So we can click on the structure and then click to paste it into the window. There's actually quite a lot of useful things in the template organizer. So if you look in this window here, you'll see the ones that I have selected are checked off. We can also sort them by user. So let's say if I just wanted to see what ones I've made, I can click that button to see that. So if we go through here, there's also a bunch of things like arrows. There's a lab kit. So if I show you in here, it'd be nicer to see. So you can see if you're trying to explain an experiment to somebody, how this might be useful. We also have rings. There's just like different groups, little arrows and orbitals. For example, maybe I wanted this guy here to draw it to explain to somebody. So after that, if we want to change the structure style, let's say that I added chlorine to my structure here, and then I wanted to make the chlorine emphasized. So the way you can do this is you can just double click, and what this is going to do is bring up the properties for that atom that I have selected right now. And you can see that we have the chlorine here. So let's say I wanted to make it bold, and I also wanted to make it green. And so I can change the colors and the style and the font and the size of the font. Then I can click OK, and we can see that the chlorine has changed to a green bold. So that's a way you can emphasize that. Another thing that we might want to do is use Markush structures. So this is more for people who are drawing structures for patents. So they don't necessarily want to disclose the entirety of the molecule. They only want to disclose the kind of general sense of the molecule. So one thing we can do here is draw, let's say, cyclohexane. And then we can add a R group to the cyclohexane. So if I just select it, and then click this button here, so you can see that there's a couple of options. We have Markush with coloration, or Markush without fragments. So we'll just do the one that has the shadows. That's the colors I was talking about. And you see that it adds the color to it and it adds the atom that I had currently selected. So I don't really like the red, so I'm going to change it to something else by double clicking on this guy. And you'll see that we have another tab here called Markush. So before we were on atom, so if we go back to Markush, we can change what color we want. And say I wanted it to be solid red instead of the pattern, I can do that as well. Or I can choose like a slightly different color, let's say orange. And then you can change the identity of this atom here. So we have a couple of labels at the bottom left-hand side. So one of them is just your generic R group, and so I can change that to an R group. And then the other thing you might want to do is make a few more options. So we can add a nitrogen here, and you'll see that there's a plus charge. So we can add a plus charge to our nitrogen that way. There's a minus charge and also radical buttons if you need those. Another thing that people might want to do is make a 3D view of the structure. So for this, we are going to use 3D Viewer. So 3D Viewer is available from the ACDLabs menu. So you can see it's the first one there. And in my case, it says loaded. You can also use the 3D button that says 3D Viewer here. So I'm going to just draw a new page, and I'm going to insert a random structure from the dictionary. Something. One would work. I like this guy. So we're going to add him to our 3D viewer, and we'll just click the 3D view button. And you'll see this brings up the structure in 3D view, and you can do the regular things at the top here. So if you want to go back to ChemSketch, we just use these buttons at the top, and you'll notice how there's a slight change. We have 3D mode on because this is a 3D viewer icon, and also the 3D viewer buttons are at the bottom. The other thing you can do is 3D optimization. So if I select this, see, I told you I hate this lasso thing. Okay, if you select the structure and then you go to tools, there are a bunch of things you can do with the structure as drawn. So one of them is the 3D structure optimization. So if I click that, it might look a bit funny because it's not actually in 3D view, but if you notice we're now on this 3D rotation buttons, that means I can click on my structure and rotate it. And now we can see that it's 3D. So that's why you might want to open it in 3D viewer, because it's a bit easier to see the bond. Another thing you might want to do is run some property calculations from within ChemSketch. So the one place we can go is in the tools menu, and you'll see that there is a calculate option. There's a bunch of things you can add here, or if you don't want to pick because you're indecisive, you can just say all properties, and it's going to put all of the results in here like this. And you can just say copy to editor, and then it will paste it in the window for you. And so we can see all the properties that we have here. So you can paste this into a report maybe, or into one of your databases that you have if you want to know more about your molecule. Another thing we can do is use the buttons at the top. So one of them, let's say maybe I want to calculate logP, I could click the calculate logP button, and it's going to put information here, and I can copy and paste this into our window as well. So now I'm just going to mention a few things about draw mode. So that was mostly structure mode. Notice that we're already in draw mode, and the reason for that is I'm working with text, so it mostly assumes that I'm not doing structures at this point. So we're just going to add a new page. So there's a couple of ways you can add things here. So we have a few just like generic lines. One thing that sometimes people get tripped up about is arrows. So in draw mode, there is an arrow, and there's also an arrow in structure mode. Now, when do you want to use one or the other? If you're using a reaction arrow, you want to be using this one in structure mode. And the reason for that is that this guy will allow you to add things to the top and bottom of your arrows. So this button here, so you can see it says reaction arrow labeling. And if you click on this, it will allow you to draw in things. Let's say I wanted to have heat and under acidic conditions. Then I would just be able to click those, and it's going to add it below the arrow for me. So the draw mode arrow doesn't have the ability to do that. You'd have to add it in yourself. And notice also the select and rotate buttons look different in draw mode. So this is essentially the equivalent of the blue pointer, and this one is the equivalent of the rotate in two-dimensional space. One thing you might also want to do is to group objects. So to do this, I'm going to show you one thing that I like about ChemSketch, and that is the grid mode. So if you go to options here and say show grid and also snap on grid, you'll see that we have all these little tiny dots on the screen. And one of the things that you can do is when you're drawing lines, so let's say I wanted to have a graph. So you'll see that it's sort of, it's doing the quote unquote snapping to grid so that I don't get messed up where I'm trying to draw this. Just makes it a little easier to use the mouse for that sort of reason. So maybe I'm doing like a gradient program or something, and I want to apply this gradient. And then I could use these markers to indicate, okay, well, this is the time here, this is the time here, and this is the time here, and that was too big. There we go. You can also use the buttons to rotate everything. So if I select this now, and then I use this button here, you'll see that I can just rotate it 90 degrees. So that's better than, for example, using the rotate button, because if I try to rotate this now, it's going to be more difficult for me to get exactly 90 degrees because I have to use my mouse to do that. Another tool that's useful in draw mode is the group button. So you can use this with structures as well. So let's say I wanted to have maybe a group here at the top and a different group here. And I'm just showing what reagents I'm adding at what time or whatever it is you're working on. And let's say I always wanted these things to be grouped to the same thing, then I can go to draw mode and I can select everything here and then click the group button, and it's going to make everything as one. So now we can just move this, it's easier to resize, that sort of thing. And then we have the usual buttons that you'll see if you use a Microsoft Word program, for example, the bring to front, bring to back. So maybe you have a couple of items and you want to say which one's going to be displaying at the front. There's also the alignment buttons. So if I zoom out full page and I click the center alignment button, it's going to put my plot in the middle of the page horizontally. And then I can also use this to center it vertically. So now it's in the middle of the page. And you can do all sorts of fun things with the boxes. So like, let's say I wanted a big box here, and if I double click on it, then I can enter the objects panel. So this is similar to the properties object for the structures. And here you can see we can have control over the pen, the fill, and the shadow for the object. So that's about it for the structure mode and draw mode. So next thing I'm going to talk about is ACD Name. So if you have purchased ACD Name separately, remember I said there was 3 main versions in here, you'll be able to see that there is a separate option that's Name. So if you click on that, it will open up Name. And the way you know you have Name open is at the top left-hand side here. It says ACD Name. There's a little icon for the name. And also there's buttons at the bottom that indicate that you are in naming mode. So if I just go and make a new page, we can turn off our grid because we don't need it anymore. Then we can draw a structure. So let's just draw something random here. I'd like to use these pieces because they're easier. And then you can also use the radicals to add whatever group you add. Say I wanted this on here too. So let's say I wanted to know the name of this compound. So the first thing I'd have to do is just click the IUPAC Name button. If you're not using Name, then the place to go would be the top here. So there's a Generate Name for Structure button. And you may also have Name for Structure options, so you can see what options it's using there. So one of the things I like to do is, you can see before when I was practicing, I put it in a different language. So I put it in Spanish, just to see what Spanish word for this molecule would be. So I can go ahead and click that button now, and it's going to put it below the structure. The other thing that you can do with the full name version is actually see where all these pieces come from. So what is the reason behind having the different groups and the naming the way it is? And to do that, you go to IUPAC Preferences, and then you go to the General tab, and there's an option where it asks you, do you want to place the name in the ChemSketch window or in the name window? And so what you can say is in the name window, and then when you click this button, so I'm just going to delete this for a second, it's going to bring up the separate naming window for your molecule, and you can see that I have in English and also in Spanish. So if you highlight over the different fragments, you can see that the part of the name this corresponds to is being highlighted in the window here. One of the functions that's nice is that you can copy the structure, you can copy the name, or you can copy the structure and the name. One of the things we also have is stereo descriptors. So this molecule doesn't actually have any. So I'm just going to go back to ChemSketch and get a molecule with some stereochemistry. So I think we need to go somewhere in here. There we go. So we can see that this one has indicated that it has some stereochemistry there. So if we draw this, and then we delete the other guy, so it doesn't get confused which one I'm talking about. And then you have to click the atom that indicates it has stereochemistry, and it's going to bring up this graph here. And this is useful for explaining whether or not it was indicated as an R or an S in the naming here. So it's just indicating the order of priority of the groups that are attached. And you can copy that graph to the editor as well. So it will paste it there for you in case you want to look at that, or say I wanted to move it over a bit because it's a bit big at this point. There are also name batch products that you can use, but I won't be talking about those today. They're sort of like ones that essentially do what we've seen, except for multiple compounds at once. But I will mention one of the things in the chemist's view. So that's the name to structure. So here we can click this button and we can see ACD name to structure. So I have uridine written here. So this is keeping track of all the ones I've done before. So maybe I want this guy today. And if I click run or just type whatever in here, it will generate the structure for it. Oh, this must have been something I did on purposely wrong. Okay, we'll try that one. There we go. So you can see it brought it up in the structure here, and we can copy this again and place it in the ChemSketch window. So I think that's about it for the naming. So one of the things that I wanted to mention as well was that we have a couple of search features. So if you guys are interested in using this to search for your molecules online, you can also do that. So if we go back to another page and we just grab another structure off the dictionary and paste it in here, and let's say we wanted to search PubChem for this structure, what we can do is we can highlight it and then click this PubChem button here. And you can say search exact structure, search substructure, and we're going to show the results today, excuse me, in the browser. So that will make a PubChem request to say, okay, we want to search for this molecule, and it will bring back web browser with that request. And you can see it has added the name and structure here. So if we want to get more information from the web, we can do it that way as well.